Welcome to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. It's the show geared toward keeping you up to speed with the latest auto news, event coverage, and expert industry insight. Now, here are your hosts, Matt Avery and John Kraman.
Hey, and welcome to another On the Move. We're so glad you've joined us today. I'm Matt Avery, executive producer of The Transmission, and joining me is John Kraman, lead TV commentator for Mecum Auctions on NBCSN. John, it's great to be back in the studio, and today we've got a special look at two-wheel transportation.
Yep, we are very fortunate, Matt, to have our friend Greg Arnold. He is the manager of the Mecum Motorcycle Division, and he's going to bring us up to speed on a very important part of the relatively recent acquisition to the Mecum auction environment, and that's the significance of motorcycles. So that's going to be a lot of fun with Greg. And then you and I are going to continue along and have some fun in segment 3 with a topic we both have a high passion for.
Yep, you and I both love Chevrolet's first-generation Camaro, and the model was launched in September. So in honor of that anniversary, you and I are celebrating by taking a close look at the 67, 68, and 69 Camaro. Now, before we get there, John, let's talk about Mecum auctions in the rest of the year.
Lots going on, Matt. Keep in mind that there's a definite formula in play here. For the remaining 5 auctions on the 2020 schedule, they are going to be 3-day auctions with 1,000-car targets. We're going to be in Dallas, October 15th through the 17th, back to Indy for what we're calling the Fall Special, October 29th through the 31st. The traditional Las Vegas in November auction is going to be occurring in November 12th through the 14th. And then Kansas City, one of our favorite venues there, Bartle Hall, downtown Kansas City, November 19th through the 21st. And then we'll wrap up the year in Houston, December 3rd through the 5th. So once again, hats off to the Mecum staff for putting together so many auctions during these difficult times, and they've really got a formula that's been accepted by the local authorities, and we are being welcomed into these cities with hopefully some really great auctions. I would recommend to anybody that's interested in consigning a car for any of those auctions, do not hesitate to get them in. We have proven during this pandemic that Mecum can still sell cars and bring really strong money.
Now, John, heading digital newsstands is a brand new copy of the Mecum Monthly Magazine. What were you writing about in your At the Redline column this time?
Yeah, what I decided to do, Matt, was just to give a little bit of highlight towards the significance of car shows and car clubs. And if for no other reason, kind of looking into the social aspect of it, the fact that you're able to meet and hang out with and develop relationships with people of a similar interest, very powerful. I've cited some examples of kind of how that all unfolded with me personally going all the way back to the 1980s. So Mecum.com for taking a look at the Mecum Monthly. Now, how about you? What was in your monthly column?
This time around, I'm looking at the story of the 2002 Year 1 edition Blackbird Trans Am. Just 8 were built, and we have an original owner car headed to our Las Vegas auction later this fall as lot number F99. Now, all of these cars were ordered through Carl Black Pontiac in Kennesaw, Georgia, a very active performance dealership who partners with GMMG, a performance shop in Marietta, Georgia, that further modifies the cars. And then the final touch on this limited run were some Year 1 branding. Year 1 is a big-time muscle car parts provider in the Atlanta area. So it's a really neat chapter of Pontiac performance, and there's a whole lot more to it. If listeners want to find out more, you can read both my column and John's column at Mecum.com. Now, John, changing gears, last week you mentioned that you were headed out to Las Vegas to do a special TV taping on some Shelbys. You're back from that trip. Tell us, how did it go?
It went really well, Matt. What we're doing is putting together one of the what we call Mecum Presents main attractions that's intended to preview high-profile cars for upcoming auctions. In this particular case, this show will be airing in the fall, no hard date yet, but it will be featuring some significant entries that will be headed to Mecum Kissimmee 2021. And I was fortunate enough to be there with 2 of the most valuable and exciting 1965 Shelby products on the planet. The first one was a 65 Shelby Cobra that was owned by the man himself, Carroll Shelby, from when it was new in 1965 all the way through his passing in 2012. And on top of that, We're also going to be selling one of 36 of the GT350R models, the race-only Shelby Mustangs that really set the stage for the performance image of the Mustang that's still being enjoyed today. Joining me for that taping session were legends, including Peter Brock, the man himself that was Carroll Shelby's first employee from the early 1960s, and he was the designer of a lot of the Shelby products and had a lot of information to share about those cars. And another guy who I'd heard about but had never met, and that's Vince Laviolette, who's the VP of Shelby American to this day, been with Shelby about 20 years. He was there to share some of his insight. Him and Carroll Shelby were really good friends, and Vince had a chance actually to drive, back in the day, had a chance to drive some of these cars. So hearing from not only how important these cars are today, but where they came from is really going to be entertaining and educational as well.
Well, John, as if that wasn't enough, you had the opportunity to head over to Shelby and check out one of their latest products, and it is, every sense of the word, a hot hauler. Tell us, what's the scoop?
Well, one of the greatest coincidences, Matt, of being out there is the Shelby American facility is only about 5 minutes from where we did this taping at. And Vince was really excited to share with me some information about a brand new product that they have. It's called the Shelby F-150 Super Snake Sport Truck. And what that is a regular cab, short bed, very kind of a nondescript, base-looking Ford truck that began life as a four-wheel drive, 5-liter, the Coyote powered, which is an option on the current F-150s, that they take to what they're calling to be the ultimate street truck. They lower these trucks down. They're available in two different versions, a 395 horsepower version with just a lightly modified Coyote, but then they go full bore with a massive supercharged 770 horsepower version. It sells for about $93,000. It does 0 to 60 in about 3.5 seconds. Available in 8 colors. They're only going to build about 250 of these. I got to see it in person. Vincent invited me over and wanted to show it off, and it's incredible. Probably one of the coolest features of it is the four-wheel drive feature automatically kicks out about 35 miles an hour, and that's to put, well, number one, it's to give traction off the line on the four-wheel drive, which is why the 0 to 60 numbers are so strong. But then so that it continues to accelerate strongly and they don't have the driveline power losses through the four-wheel drive, it automatically, seamlessly disengages the four-wheel drive feature and drives the rear tires only until it slows down again to around 35 miles per hour or below, and then it kicks back in. A lot of technology, and you got to see this truck. Shelby.com, and, take a look at it. It's really cool.
Well, keeping the truck theme going, John, Ford has announced that they are offering a trimmer off-road package on the 2021 Ranger. Now, we last saw the trimmer name about 15 years ago, and on that Ranger, it was mostly cosmetics. This time around, it does look like it's packing some serious off-road chops. The package costs $4,290, and what it brings are items like a lifted suspension with 32-inch all-terrain tires wrapped around painted wheels. There's rear recovery hooks, skid plates, and inside exclusive seats with suede inserts, and a 6-switch auxiliary power pack, making it very easy to control accessories like a winch or lighting. Now, there are some other call-outs. There's some graphics that go with the package, and all in all, I think it's a really neat setup. It looks like it's a blast to drive. But all I'm doing, John, is I'm hoping that this just opens up the door further until we get a full-blown Raptor Ranger. That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, certainly the trend, Matt, as we very well know, we've talked about in regards to ultra performance versions of trucks in general. So, yeah, would not be surprised to see some type of a power upgrade and, of course, a price increase as well on that in the future.
Well, and another Ford product that you and I both have been wondering about a performance upgrade is the Bronco. You had heard some rumors about that. Any light you can shed if a V8 Bronco is in the works?
The answer is maybe. Some word coming out of Ford this week in regards to rumors of a V8-powered Bronco has been kind of set aside for now. Officially, Ford has come out and said, nope, we're not planning a V8 version. But I have been reading between the lines, and I think that down the road, they'll be making an announcement for a higher horsepower version of the Bronco. Right now, there's 2 engines available, the 2.3-liter Turbo 4 that you mentioned that the Ranger has in it, the Tremor. But they've also got in the Bronco the 2.7 turbocharged V6, which is a very potent performer. But keep in mind, in the Ford stable, the EcoBoost V6 is sort of their new performance engine. A couple of versions available that just might work in the Bronco in the future, and this is my own opinion. They have a 400 horsepower 3-liter turbocharged version currently used in the Explorer, the performance version of the Explorer, and then, of course, the current generation, the 2020 Raptor pickup truck, has a 450 horsepower version of the 3.5 liter V6. I would not be surprised if we see one of those engines as a production upgrade into a Bronco down the road. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's clear that more power is coming from Ford. It's just a matter of how. They, as you said, they've got some options to work with. Now, for enthusiasts, the best news probably is that if a V8 Bronco is not coming from Ford or not coming soon, there's a whole aftermarket community that is ready and willing and able to meet that demand. And I think we are going to be seeing V8 Broncos one way or another from longtime players like Shelby and Roush. Now let's change gears to talk Italian sports cars. Maserati made big news this week by showing off their brand new MC20. It's a 2-seater that features a twin-turbo V6 with a mid-engine layout. The powertrain is rated at 620 horsepower, 538 pound-feet of torque. Maserati is claiming a 0 to 60 time of 2.9 seconds and a top speed of 202 miles per hour. So far, they've only shown off the coupe, but have said a convertible, the platform does lend itself to a convertible variant, as well as a full electric version as well. The brand is taking orders with a price starting around $215,000. John, I really like it. I think it's got great styling. It has very cool butterfly doors. It's got that wow factor that I think Maserati needs to get some eyeballs back onto what they're doing. And I think the MC20 is just the ticket.
Mid-engine sports cars certainly have been getting an awful lot of attention, and I like this Maserati kind of jumping into that game. The fact that they've gone with a heavily turbo-boosted V6, not that unusual. Keep in mind that the current generation Ford GT is also turbocharged V6, and if we take the technology and even boil it off to the distance a little bit within the race community in regard to both Indy cars and F1 cars, both of those platforms currently using a V6 turbocharged power plant. So is it signaling sort of the wave of the future for where we might be going as we're trying to combine fuel economy with performance? Perhaps. But yeah, I think that that the new Maserati's got its sight just right pointed at the McLaren GT, which has a base price in the $200,000 range, slightly over with as well. So fine with me. Another competitor in that high-performance mid-engine supercar, welcome it.
Don't adjust that dial. On the Move, we'll be right back. Our program is proudly presented by Mecum Auctions, the world's largest collector car auctions. Now back to Matt and John.
We are back with a very special guest, longtime Mecum employee, Greg Arnold. He's the director of the motorcycle division. Very honored that Greg had some time to stop by and talk motorcycles, which is, I think, relevant now, Matt, because this is the first time that we've had somebody talking motorcycles. The cars and tractors, of course, have been pretty well covered. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining Matt and I here this morning. Much appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really happy to be here. I do follow the podcast. I enjoy it. It's a valuable addition to our, general Mecum identity for sure.
Good. So take us back to day one. How did Mecum and motorcycles combine?
Well, I think, Mecum has always sold some motorcycles. Dana Mecum has a long-term association with Ron Christensen, who was the originator and owner of Mid-America Motorcycles, and they, did some work together over the years. And then in 2014, we took a financial position with Mid-America Motorcycles, which at the time was the largest antique and collector motorcycle auction in the world, and selling primarily in Las Vegas in January in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 motorcycles. And since we entered the picture, we are now, last year we had 1,750 motorcycles, so it's grown a lot in 6 years.
Greg, over that time, what are some of the trends that we've seen at the auction with collecting and what's hot?
Well, I think early on, the gold standard would be the equivalent of the brass era cars. It was the very early motorcycles, mostly the American manufacturers of the time. Of course, it was Harley Davidson and Indian, but also Excelsior. They were the big three, and then Henderson had a very fine product. And those early examples were the big dollars then. Since then, it has moved up the calendar, if you will, quite a ways. Still, pre-World War II is hot in American motorcycles, and also in British and other marques also. But, recent trends, the demographic is changing, as we know. So Japanese motorcycles of the 60s and 70s have become very popular. Their prices have gone up, nearly exponentially, and now we're seeing the entry of the sport bikes from the 80s and even the 1990s and early 2000s at this point are now entering the collector market, and they've responded very well. That price has increased quite a bit.
Collections continue to be a really big part of not only the car auctions, but maybe even on a percentage basis to the motorcycle auctions. What is your involvement with collections?
We get inquiries from people that have collections, of course, and my involvement is I will travel and I'll go see what the collection consists of firsthand. I'll generally get some kind of list, sometimes not. We have 60 motorcycles of various makes. Can you come and look? And I say, I certainly will. And, it does involve a lot of travel, which I do not mind one bit.
Some of that is even internationally. Greg, tell us a little bit more about some of those adventures.
Yeah, international definitely comes into the picture. I've been to Guatemala. They're a combination of motorcycles and cars. Motorcycles only, Johannesburg, South Africa. That's quite a ways away. That is a over 30-hour trip. You have to do it in multi-legs. Stockholm, Sweden. Pesaro, Italy, also for another collection, and then Central Italy as well. So yeah, that's you do get around, and continental United States is fairly large, and you go from one corner of that to the other, year in and year out too.
One of the things that I've noticed at the motorcycle auction is the diversity, not just in make and model, but also in size. It seems like this mini bike craze is really taking off with collectors, and they are really enjoying these smaller motorcycles.
Well, they do enjoy them. They were entry level. This motorcycle collecting is just like the car side. It's all about what you had, or maybe even more importantly, what you couldn't have when you were a kid. So now when you're older, now you can have it, or you can revisit the one that you had. And the mini bikes, the really small ones, do well at car auctions too, because the car guys, even if they never had another motorbike of any kind, boy, a whole lot of them had a mini bike. So,
speaking of the car guys, give us your thoughts on any direct or indirect connection between the traditional car bidders at a Mecum auction and the bidders at the cycle auctions as well.
Well, I think motorcycles, our motorcycle riding and interest is concurrent with some of the car guys. I think certainly the car guys that are nuts and bolts guys, the guys that like the mechanical aspect of what they're collecting in cars, respond well to motorcycles, because with motorcycles, that is all on display. There's basically no body work. So how a motorcycle works and how it was developed from the earliest years to present times is readily viewable. So I think car guys like that too.
One of the stars of the January motorcycle auction is a 1950 Vincent Black Lightning. Greg, fill us in a little bit. What makes that motorcycle so unique?
Well, it was extremely fast when it was produced. It was rare. There was only some 31 of them produced in their short-lived production. It was a high-spec motorcycle. At the time, it was capable of 150 miles an hour. Now, in 1950, there was nothing you could buy that would go that fast except the Vincent Black Lightning.
What are you guessing that motorcycle might fetch?
Oh, I think it'll be in the $500,000 range. No problem. Could well exceed that. They just do not come up. There was one sold at auction a couple of years ago. I think it was a bit of an anomaly, but right now it is the top-selling motorcycle ever. It's somewhere north of $900,000.
Greg, what are some other highlights that we can look forward to at that event?
Well, I think it'll be the collections, and as always, it's the incredible diversity, both in model year from the very oldest to some pretty new stuff. It's just there are motorcycles there, even if you're not buying or selling. There are motorcycles there you will not see elsewhere in the world until the next one.
Let's remind everybody, talking about the big Mecum motorcycle auction coming up January 26th through the 31st of 2021. That's 6 big days at South Point. One thing that I've noticed, Greg, I'd like to get your thoughts on it, is besides the motorcycles in attendance, this is really a world event for motorcycle enthusiasts. It's kind of one of the big events to attend if you're a motorcycle enthusiast, the social aspect of it and the friendships that are developed and the stuff that happens after the auction, going out to dinner and hanging out with the different people, continues to be a huge, huge part of this. Do you think that has a lot to do with the success of this auction?
I think it does. I think over the years it's become, the destination. We do a tremendous amount of international business, and I know it's where old friends, they may only see each other once a year, and it'll be at this auction, and they may be friends because they met at this auction, or they may have sold a motorcycle that their new friend bought. It truly is the place to be.
World's largest motorcycle auction, and a very special anniversary is happening this year. Fill us in on the timing of that one.
It is. Mid-America started, their first auction in Las Vegas in 1991. The venue's changed a couple of times. We've been at the South Point Hotel and Casino for quite a few years now, and this will be the 30th annual. So it is a long-standing collector motorcycle auction.
And speaking of milestones, John, you shared with us that you are a current record holder when it comes to sales. Fill us in on the Kawasaki that you sold at the auction a couple years ago.
Yeah, 2018, Greg helped me get my 1979 Kawasaki KZ1300 entered that I'd owned since the late 1990s. I'm the second owner, and it brought $9,350. I sold it no reserve. I'm kind of a big no reserve guy, as we've talked about before. And I was hoping maybe $5,000 or $6,000 ought to be in the ballpark. And I just checked the Mecum results website this morning, and it continues to hold the record for the highest selling KZ1300 ever. Of course, it's not a very long list. It's a rare motorcycle. There's only been 4 of them have been sold, but it'd be fun to kind of keep an eye on that. Greg, any final thoughts about to potential consigners about getting involved with this auction?
Well, I think, if you're consigning, the earlier the better. We have motorcycles on the website now. We have a lot of room in this auction. It is 6 days. But premium positions, they do go fast. So if you want, the very best spot in the auction, then you should act soon. There is no bad spot. I mean, this is the auction the world comes to buy and sell motorcycles. But for the very best positions, you should do it now.
And extra promotion that folks will get as a benefit of getting in early as well. Somebody is interested. What's the best way they get a hold of you to talk motorcycles?
Just call the main Mecum line and ask for Greg. I'm the only one here. Just say motorcycle and I'll get the call.
Don't adjust that dial. On the Move, we'll be right back. Our program is proudly presented by Mecum Auctions, the world's largest collector car auctions. Now back to Matt and John.
Well, John, as we do time to time, we profile certain vehicles that have extreme importance. And today we are looking at the first generation Camaro. And what a better opportunity. It launched in September. So kind of in the spirit of celebrating Camaro, we're taking a close look at 67, 68, and 69. probably one of the most popular vehicles for collectors.
Well, as we know, Matt, this car was developed to go after the huge success of the Ford Mustang, which we first saw April 1964 as a 1965 model. And despite a great effort right out of the box with the Camaro beginning in 1967, as you mentioned, in those early years, that never hit the target of the Mustang as far as total sales. Now, that having said, fast forward to today, and one of the most popular and common vehicles on the Mecum auction block, whether they're stock, original, or restored, or day two lightly modified, or full-blown resto mods, they continue to be some of the most popular cars that we happen to see, the collector car world in general. And I don't think it's accidental, Matt, that the Generation 5 and Generation 6, the current Camaros, have their styling roughly based on that one-year-only 69 model. So I think we'll have some fun kind of taking folks back to kind of how it all started with the Camaro, certainly well predating 1967.
And one of the things that's interesting to note during that development is that Chevrolet was originally going to call the car Panther, and then over time they changed it to be Camaro. John, anything else that listeners should know about the car's development and launch?
Well, Chevy, right away, as soon as they saw the success of the Mustang, they said, we got to jump into this game. So really, in the second half of 1964 is when the development started on this new car. And also might want to mention that it was also, Pontiac had a version of the Camaro built on what was referred to at that time and still is today, the F-body platform, as a companion to the Chevy. But they started working on the car almost right away. They saw that the Mustang was an important car, was a huge seller, and it all fit under the umbrella at that time, not so much used anymore, of the term sport compact, sharing a lot of the components and a lot of the parts with their entry-level cars. In the case of the Mustang, of course, it was the Ford Falcon, a lot of the underpinnings, but boy, coming up with a body design that looked a lot more upscale than what the underpinnings were was one of the key. And it might be surprised to hear that in 1967, when the Camaro debuted, actually it was September of 1966, when it officially launched, so many of those cars were built with one of two available six-cylinder engines. Standard engine was a 230 cubic inch inline six and an optional 250 cubic inch six. Now, of course, there were V8s available, and we'll talk about those, but it was really intended to be, from the beginning, as a great-looking car that a buyer could purchase on a budget. Today, we begin to think of that car as a performance car. Pretty much all we see have V8s, whether they're original or transplants or whatever. So from what the car, I think, started and intended to be, the competitor with the Mustang for somebody that wanted something that looks cool, but they could buy in a budget, would be reliable and economical to operate, the reputation of the car certainly has changed since then. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of that has to do with how the car was launched and the season that it was launched in. So rewind the clock back to 1967, and not only is Chevrolet trying to launch a competitor to the Mustang, but they're also trying to launch a sports kind of oriented car during a season when they're not supposed to be doing that from a corporate standpoint. So the U.S. government had started paying close attention to Chevrolet. It was a very large company. They were thinking about possibly stepping in to break it up, deeming it a monopoly. So here you find Chevrolet trying to launch some kind of a performer, but really with their hands tied. So that's why the car comes out of the gate kind of with performance as a secondary consideration. And, they were able to get some efforts off the ground like Z28 and some of the others that we'll talk about, but it didn't come out strong as a true performer, at least not initially.
Well, and that is the point, Matt, that you make a very good one, is the fact that this was a very serious car in Chevrolet's mind, particularly those that understood the significance of importance of the reputation of being a performance car. During the 60s was the era of that just going crazy. And the development of the Z28 with the 302, 290 horsepower small block engine in an era where big block engines were really starting to be king was really important because it made that engine legal for that SCCA road course racing that really helped put Camaro on the performance map right from the beginning. There's another engine variant that was available fairly early on in the 67 model run, that 375 horsepower 396 as well. Kind of a surprising engine, pretty radical engine for the street. Bill Grumpy Jenkins, famed drag racer, had great instant success right out of the gate. So here you've got GM officially out of racing, but they've got their debut launch of the 67 Camaro, and it's getting a lot of headlines on the road courses and on the drag strips as well. So it was interesting how Chevy navigated that. You know, another neat little tidbit about the Camaro in 1967 was a launch of arguably the most important Chevrolet engine of all time, the venerable 350 cubic inch version of the small block that started life way back in 1955 as a 265. The Camaro launched that engine, was rated 295 horsepower. It was optional. And as an example, the Corvette didn't get the 350 until 2 years later in 1969. So pretty noteworthy car in a lot of ways, a lot of new technology in the way that they've integrated a bolt-on with only 4 bolts, 2 per side subframe onto a unibody structure, kind of blending traditional full frame and unibody, because the Mustang was full unibody as a comparison. So they really did a nice job of covering a lot of bases with the car. Come out with a great-looking car, a low-price 6-cylinder or small 327 was their entry-level V8 and 67, was available all the way up with a couple of steps up, all the way up to a pair of 396. As I mentioned, that 375-horse version, you could also get a hydraulic lift or milder version, still a torque monster and a good street performer, the 325-horse 396 as well. So you had a lot of choices in that debut year. That's 7 engine options that were available right at the launch. So I think they had performance in mind right from the beginning.
Well, what I don't think they knew right from the beginning was the extent that Z28 would become its own thing and have a life of its own. You know, it's interesting that was originally just an RPO code, just an arbitrary number and letter assigned to the car just to designate the grouping of parts. And then come to find out, I mean, it really caught on where it became its own thing. It developed a following. And, you know, Chevy has even brought back Z28 many times over the car's run. So really interesting that it all started from a simple RPO code, and that caught on with enthusiasts.
Well, and they figured it did because they had pretty good success from the beginning with kind of a landmark engine, a high-performance, tiny engine. The 302 was kind of a hybrid engine where it was the bore, 4-inch bore of a 327, but yet the stroke, the crankshaft of a 283, which is 3 inches. And what that makes is for a relatively large bore and a short stroke, so the engine could breathe good, especially at higher RPM, and it could have reliability at the high RPM ranges due to that short stroke. So it was a really cool project that they dipped their toe in and went full bore with it the following year, 1968. In fact, keep in mind, in 1967, there was no Z28 badging. It didn't exist yet.
Yeah, good point.
But it did in 1968. They were so proud of this, they wanted to shout it to the world. They made that badging available. So a couple of ways you could tell that you had, other than the rumble of that solid lifter cam 302 with exhaust headers, had a really distinctive exhaust tone and growl to the engine, was the fact that it had the dual stripes that you had mentioned, and it also had 15-inch wheels and tires as opposed to 14-inch on everything else.
Well, and the results in terms of sales clearly show that the model caught on. As we said, in 1967, just 602 are made. That number jumps in 1968 to 7,199. And then in 1969, that number nearly triples to 20,302. And John, as we see time and time again on the auction block, by far the 1969 Z28 is one of the most desirable muscle cars on the planet.
No doubt about it. And, you know, you look at the huge jumps in the production numbers of the Z28. The production numbers overall of the Camaro were fairly stable for that 3-year run. Let me give you some numbers. In 67, about 221,000 were built in the launch year, and then 68, 235,000, a little over that. And then in 1969, the final year of the Generation 1 cars, and the final year of the 302 cubic inch version of the Z28, 243,000 of those. So you really begin to see that the Z28 really began to take a life of its own once again, in an era of big block power and big horsepower, there were street enthusiasts that really kind of appreciated what they did. And I think if there's a legacy that was brought out of that era continuing today, and that is for a high performance, high revving, lightweight V8 power plant, that's still well over 50 years later. That's still kind of the formula that's appealing and works today.
Yeah. And of course, no conversation of first generation Camaros is complete without talking about the Copo Camaros that were created, which came about through dealerships using paperwork to kind of bend the rules to get Chevrolet to build Camaros officially they weren't building. And really what enthusiasts wanted was 427 equipped Camaros. Now, before Chevrolet and the Copo cars come about, in 67, you have this immediate rise of dealerships as well as third-party kind of tuners and performance shops that step in to offer these 427 conversions and transplants, since Chevrolet is not offering a 427 from the factory. So that's where you see names like Dana Chevrolet, Baldwin Motion, Nicky, and Yanko, where they start cropping up because they are rising up to meet customer demand for that 427 power.
Here's why that was relatively easy to do. We've talked a little bit about the 396, and the top performance version of that engine was a 375 horsepower version, which was the highest horsepower RPO, regular production option. The Copo program is under a completely different set of rules and guidelines. But the nice thing about the 427 is, Matt, is it literally is directly interchangeable with the 396. So prior to these tuner dealers figuring out they could use the Copo program to get 427s factory installed, they could fairly easily buy the 427 engines from Chevrolet and install them in 396 Mark IV big block equipped Camaros relatively easily. But obviously it's a heck of a lot easier if you can order that right from the factory and not have to do an engine transplant and then figure out to do with the spare engine when you were all done.
Well, and that's a great point, John, because that's exactly the predicament that Don Yanko found himself in 1968, that he was hiring his technicians to swap out the 396 to 427 short blocks. And that's what drove him to approach Chevrolet about saying, hey, can we get a 427 installed right on the factory under this Copo program? And when he gets that greenlit and he has cars arriving to his dealerships with the 427s already installed, it's a game changer.
I want to talk a little bit about what I consider to be perhaps certainly the most rare and maybe the most valuable Camaro of all time. Kind of fits within this conversation you and I are having. In 1968, you mentioned Vince Piggins, such a performance enthusiast. He wanted to impress Pete Estes, who at the time was the GM general manager, with a very special car. And he really thought maybe letting his boss experience just how special of this high performance small block the Z28 was. Only problem is Pete always had convertibles. So thanks to the Copo program, here we go once again, not just all about the big block era. What he did is for his boss, he ordered what was the only factory Z28 convertible built during the first generation run. It was in 1968. It's dark green with a white interior. That car still exists today. In fact, it's part of Dana Mecum's personal collection. I've seen the car. I've never driven it. I've actually seen that car, and that car certainly, if it ever goes to market, that is a multiple seven-figure car, very well known. And that's kind of a maybe not often told part of the Copo story, but certainly a very important one, as I'm sure there were other pretty neat one-of-a-kind cars too, but nothing as high profile or significant as that one-of-a-kind Z28.
Now, another part of these car stories that I really like is the in-the-trunk components. And so when a customer would order this car, they had the option to tack on some additional components, but they wouldn't be installed at the factory. Rather, they would be shipped in the trunk and then installed by dealership techs. And so what a customer could opt for is a cowl air plenum and exhaust headers. So another fun little slice of history about these cars.
Well, and the exhaust headers in particular, Matt, do a tremendous amount to uncork and open up the performance potential. We talked earlier about how that particular engine, the 302, develops power at a high RPM range, And as a result of that, you really need good breathing to be able to get that exhaust gas out without a lot of back pressure, keeping combustion chamber contaminated with exhaust gases. So headers were, for any type of a performance use, were totally necessary. And Chevy, not shy, despite the ban on racing, not shy about having a lot of high performance goodies available. The cowl induction, cowl plenum air intake to provide cold air intake's a big one. The headers I mentioned, and another real big one, that cross ram intake manifold with two big 4-barrel carburetors, two big Hollies, replacing the single Holly. Another one of those items that we occasionally see from time to time. Looks impressive. Not so much sure it's tractable for street performance, but certainly if you're going to have one of those cars on the racetrack back in the day to extract maximum power, that's the route you want to go.
John, let's wrap up the conversation by talking about value. When it comes to these first-gen Camaros, what are the ones that are bringing maximum dollar when they cross the auction block?
Well, that's a good question, Matt. The answer to a lot of folks might be not really what they expect. And, of course, with the current trend of resto mods, which is loosely the definition of a vintage car with modern upgrades and mechanical and suspension and braking, cosmetics, comfort items as well, they continue to be a very popular platform, the early Camaros in particular. In fact, I'd put them certainly within the top 5, maybe the top 3. I'd put maybe second generation Corvettes, the C2s from 63 through 67, certainly the early Mustangs and the first gen Camaros, as we're talking about today, fit into that. And to get one that's been done to a high level of quality and expertise using state-of-the-art componentry, you're talking a 6-figure plus vehicle. So, we're in an era where a new generation of potential buyer enthusiast is really embracing the platform of that car, how simple it is, how good looking it is, and how just the overall appeal of that car, taking them into resto mods. Now, on the other side, we'll switch gears and go back to the conversation in regard to cars that are not modified. There's obviously one first-generation Camaro in particular that rides head and shoulders above all else, and that would be the 1969 ZL1. 69 of those were built with that all-aluminum 427. We see those from time to time in a Mecum auction block. They're $500,000 on up, depending on how original they are. Do they have the original engine? A lot of other variables, but that's the one in my mind that sort of sits out there as the top tier of the production cars, not including that Z28 convertible I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, as we said, September is the anniversary of Camaro, and so congrats to the model for an incredible run, and here's hoping for many more happy years ahead.
Yeah, and I think we'll continue along the same theme down the road. We'll take a look next at maybe down the road a bit at the second generation Camaro, very important car in its own right. But for right now, it's been a lot of fun here just chatting and celebrating that landmark first-generation Camaro.
You've been listening to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. For more information, visit Mecum.com. And join us again next time as we take you inside the world of muscle and collector cars and more.